Would be nice, I guess. How are you doing this morning?
Good.
Good. Sounds like fun. Hey, fess up. Who started watching Christmas movies?
2 months ago.
Started. No, it's stopped. I haven't watched the Christmas movie yet. I don't think. Have we? No, I started Christmas music this week, though. My favorite Christmas songs are probably Santa Claus is Coming to Town by Bruce Springsteen, All I Want for Christmas Is You by Mariah Carey. Yeah, that's right. Best Christmas album ever. Merry Christmas by Mariah Carey. We're not even discussing it. And then Hark the Herald Angels Sing is my all-time favorite. What are some of your favorite Christmas songs? Did you just say Mary, did you know?
Yes.
We can't be friends anymore. Don't get me shot. Of course she knew. An angel came and told her. I'm not. Is it blood coming on my ears right now? Okay, you know what? You can't say Christmas shoes either. What are your favorite Christmas songs?
Silent Night.
Silent Night, great one. What else? Jingle Bells. Oh, Holy Night. Good one. You're a neat one, Mr. Grinch. Was that Harry? What child is this? All those songs that kind of bring that like nostalgic Christmas feeling. Like nostalgia can be really nice. It just makes us, it reminds us of a time when we were happy, so we feel happy. The problem is that the past is often just as much a figment of our imagination as the future. And sometimes we remember the past as being so wonderful and cheery, and I wish things were like that again. And we look at where we are, and we think, man, this is going to be different. You know, like the governor's telling us not to get together with too many people from other households, and people are sick this year, and it seems like, every Christmas, it's like, it's Christmas? I can't believe it's Christmas already. It snuck up on me. It's December every year, and every year we get right here. It's like, oh, this is Thanksgiving. I haven't even started my Christmas shopping yet. I remember the good old times when we had lots of money to buy presents. Actually, I don't remember that. That's never been the case. But I think we often go into the holiday season thinking that it's not going to be as good as it was when. It won't be as good as it was when the kids were in the house, or so-and-so were still married, or maybe before they got married. It was nice when she wasn't around. Or, and this year it just kind of feels different. It is different. You get the COVID-19 situation, and as it turns out, every year is different. Sometimes at Christmas you got awkward family dynamics. Families are fighting. Yeah, you're laughing because I said sometimes at Christmas there's awkward family. It's every Christmas. You know what topics you can't bring up at Christmas because it's just going to be an argument. Things just never quite feel like they used to. Everything seemed simpler before. Now it's like, can I afford Christmas gifts? Heck, can I afford Thanksgiving dinner? In fact, while I mention that, we're giving away Thanksgiving dinners last week and this week. If you're in a position where you don't think you can afford Thanksgiving dinner, we have extras. And just send me a text, let me know, we'll get you one, the whole thing, turkey, potatoes, stuffing, stuff. It's already purchased. So if you need it and don't take it, I'm just going to eat Thanksgiving dinner like 6 times next month. Probably not the best solution. But we get frustrated with nostalgia because sometimes nostalgia makes us remember things in a way that isn't accurate. And we find ourselves complaining to God, and we say, God, when are you going to do something? When are you going to fix it? And we have our definition of what fix it looks like. It's to put it back. When are you going to restore it? When are you going to rebuild it? When are you going to make it like it was? Because as much as we enjoy nostalgia, it can bring us to a place where we start to become discontent, dissatisfied, and we start to complain. And then something as wonderful as Santa Claus is Coming to Town by Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band suddenly makes us not very happy. You think, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't the Thanksgiving I wanted. This isn't the Christmas I wanted. How many of us are going into the holidays pre-disappointed? well, it's not going to be as good. We're dreading what's coming, and we're not even there. So we've been talking about, we're in a study called Ezra, that God is constant. And we're looking at characteristics of God that never change. And the one we're going to look at today is God is faithful. God is faithful every time. He always has been. He always will be. He is today. God is faithful. Now that seems like something we shouldn't need to be reminded of, but let me tell you, when we're frustrated, when we're upset, when things don't feel like they're going our way, we need to be reminded that God is faithful. And in that faithfulness, God is innovative. I searched the thesaurus for a better word than innovative. I can't find a word that says what I want to say, so I'm just going to say what I want to say. God does the same thing in different ways. God provides, God protects, God fulfills his promises, God keeps his word. God does all the same things. He does them in different ways. If we were to do a study of the Old Testament battles that the Israelites had to fight, in one battle, we would see that God says, go and fight. And they fight all day. And they have to fight all night. So Joshua prays that the sun would stay up all night long so they could continue to fight. And we go a couple chapters later and God says, don't fight. I'll fight for you. Then you go a couple books ahead and God sends Gideon in with 300 people versus 30,000, and God wins the battle for them. You get to the book of 2 Kings and Hezekiah's going to the battle and God says, send the worshipers on the front line. Because when I'm going to war, that's what I want, is the musicians up front in their skinny jeans, right? But God defeats them. God protected them in all those times, but each time, he did it differently. When God provides provision, if we were to read the Old Testament, we'd see that as the Israelites were moving through the desert, God's literally dropping manna from heaven, bread from heaven. Not pennies from heaven, which is Sinatra, which is not even a Christmas song. But manna from heaven, God's feeding them. Yet, when Jesus comes, he multiplies fish and loaves to feed 5,000. And at one point, Jesus is in a boat with Peter and his buddies, and Jesus says, hey, toss the net on the right side of the boat. And they toss the net out, and there's so many fish that the nets are starting to break. God provided food all those times, but every time he did it differently. Heck, when God parted the Red Sea for Moses, it said there was a wall of water on their left and a wall of water on their right, and they walked through on dry land. And yet when God parted the Jordan River for Joshua, it says the waters were dammed upstream and stopped flowing. God does the same things, but he's innovative. He does it in new ways. And I think sometimes we feel like God's not faithful because we're waiting for God to do the same thing he did last time, and we're missing what God is doing in the moment. And we become nostalgic about how God delivered us, and we're, come on God, come on God, come on God, and we're ignoring what God is doing right in front of us. God is constant, but he's not predictable. He never has been. Nostalgia always says it was better when. Listen, I love nostalgia. I love making cookies with the kids and putting the tree up and Christmas songs and watching Elf and watching Santa Claus 2 400 times between now and Christmas. It's going to happen. I think one year Joy watched Santa Claus 2 every day for over a year. Like 365 days. Every year I can sing all the songs. I believe. Yeah. Nostalgia always makes us feel like it was better when. So we're in Ezra. Don't turn there. I want you to do exactly what we did last week. I want you to go to Haggai. Go to Haggai chapter 2. So I'm going to start the story in Ezra. We're going to go see what Haggai said to these folks, and then we'll come back to Ezra. We can come back together if you want. But in Ezra chapter 5, they have now started rebuilding the temple again. Remember last week they had stopped building for 16 years, and Haggai got motivated, and now they're building. Well, in that 16-year period, a lot of things has changed. King Cyrus of Persia is no longer the king. Now King Darius is kind of ruling the empire. The local governor who works directly for the king in Samaria has changed. I don't know what the last guy's name, but the new guy's name is Tatanai. That's probably how you pronounce it. As far as you know, that's how you pronounce it. And the Jews start building this temple. So the local governor from Samaria hears, hey, there's this giant building project going on in Jerusalem. He comes down and he says, Who gave you guys permission to do a building project? Now, if you've ever done construction, the last thing you want is the inspector showing up saying, let me see some permits. It's like, oh, here we go. So the guy comes, I want to see your building permit. Who told you you could do this? And they said, oh, well, King Cyrus back in 539 BC sent us here to build the temple. King Cyrus, go ahead, keep going, sent you. And then he says, I want the names of all the people working on this temple. Now, if you've ever been on a construction site, when the inspector shows up, you just kind of let the boss handle that. And I'm just going to go over here and mind my own business. If he were suddenly saying, I need to see ID and I want your name, like, what you need my name for? I'm just moving dirt. Suddenly things are getting very tense because this guy's writing a letter to the king back in Persia. Now, he doesn't tell them they have to stop working, but for sure, when your name is being reported back to the king, you're going to get a little nervous. You're going to start, I don't know, looking for reasons to not be at work today. Okay? So that's what's happening right now. It's been like 3 weeks since they started working, and suddenly they're facing not quite opposition, but the government interfering with their plans. Try to imagine the government interfering with your plans. If you can just put yourself in a situation where somebody was like, if a governor was telling you to do something and you didn't really want to do it. It's hard to imagine, but let's go there. So we're going to go to Haggai chapter 2. In the 7th month, on the 21st day of the month, October 17th. This is October 17th, 520 BC. They've been working on the temple again for 3 weeks. And God says, speak to them. I'm going to jump down to verse 3 to just list all the people they're talking to. Haggai says, who is left among you who saw this house in its former glory? How do you see it now? Is it not as nothing in your eyes? So they're building on the Temple Mount. Have you ever seen a picture of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem right now? The Dome of the Rock is a Muslim mosque that sits on the Temple Mount where the temple used to sit. They're on the Temple Mount. It's this huge area, 2,700 square feet, and they're building this little temple. Imagine with me if a hurricane blew this building away, and we said, okay, well, we have to rebuild the church, and we built it just like a little bigger than this stage. That's what we have money for. Wow. Whoop-de-doo. It's going to be a great church. It's a fraction of what we used to have. Man, it was sure nice when we had Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple was 2,700 square feet. In today's dollars, it would have cost $200 billion to manufacture. That's how much gold was in there. Now, if you want to compare that with something, the Raiders just built a stadium in Las Vegas. It's state-of-the-art. They spent $2 billion on a football stadium. Solomon spent $200 billion. Everything was laid with gold. It was a monstrosity. It was the most beautiful thing in all of the kingdom. And now they're building this tiny little temple. And Haggai says, hey, who remembers the other one? Doesn't this look like nothing to you? He knows what they're thinking. He's addressing the idea that they're disappointed with what they have. There's always a reason to complain, isn't there? Like if you've ever hung around a teenager. There's no food in this house. Really? You never fill in the blank. You always do this. Why does it always have to be the way? My 6-year-old thinks everything is going to take forever. And I just got a little annoyed because I said it like she says it every day. Joy, go brush your teeth. It's going to take forever. There's always a reason to complain. If you've been around church for any amount of time, you know Christians are great at finding a reason to complain. All you got to do is paint the lobby. I looked at the old way. I wanted a darker shade. I wanted a brighter shade. Why can't it be orange? Because we don't paint lobbies orange. It's stupid. People will find a reason to complain. There's always something we can complain about. And it's usually we're complaining because things aren't the way we expected them to be. That's not what we thought would happen. That's not how we thought God was going to answer, how God was going to deliver. Verse 4. Yet now, be strong, O Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Be strong, O Joshua, son of Jehozadak, probably. Be strong, all you people of the land, declares the Lord. Work, for I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts, according to the covenant that I made with you when you came out of Egypt. It's October 17th, 520 BC. It's the last day of the Feast of Booths. Now, how many Jews we got here? Anybody Jewish heritage? No? If you were, you probably would not have celebrated the Feast of Booths this past week. The Feast of Booths, what they would do is they would camp out for a week around the Temple Mount to commemorate how the Jews went through the desert for 40 years and they had to sleep in tents. So the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tents, is they would come together. It was a big family camping trip, like family camp, and they would all camp around the temple, and there'd be preaching, and they'd hear from the Torah, and there'd be worship, and this is the last day. So on the last day of the Feast of Booths, commemorating the trip out of Egypt, the text they would have studied as they're getting ready to go home is the speech, I'm not making this up, I'm telling you, that Joshua would have given to the Israelites as they're going into the land. And he says, be strong, for the Lord your God is with you. Joshua 1:9 says, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. Haggai's preaching to them, Joshua. It's like, remember the sermon you heard this morning? That's what I'm telling you. Don't you hate it when that happens? If you ever get home from church Sunday afternoon, you're in a bad mood, and somebody says, didn't you hear what the preacher said? Shut up. Let me tell you, it's way worse at my house. Didn't you just say, oh, don't preach to me, I'm off the clock. So why does God do it? God thinks he's so cute, and he just throws that stuff right back in your face. But that's exactly what Haggai's doing. He's like, guys, we just talked about this. Be strong. For the Lord your God is with you. He says it 3 times. Be strong, Zerubbabel. Be strong, Joshua. Joshua was the high priest. Joshua was the name of the guy who said, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. I mean, Haggai knows exactly what he's doing. Yet, this isn't the temple they wanted. And if Twitter had been around, the hashtag would have been, not my temple. Not my temple. No, my temple. The big temple, Solomon's temple, gold temple. That was, this is a joke. It's not as good. It's not what I wanted. See, the purpose of the temple was not to be beautiful and ornate and huge. That was great when it was. The purpose of the temple was to provide a place where there was sacrifice and where the people could receive mercy. Now, for years, that was the tabernacle, which is a nice way of saying dusty, ratty tent. See, when they put the tabernacle together, it was a beautiful new tent. And then they marched it through the desert for 40 years. And then for another 360 years, the tabernacle was set up in 2 different places in Israel. Started in one place and got moved to Jerusalem. And it was a tent. And as the winds blew and the storms came, they had to replace panels of it. It was an old tent. And yet it was a place where they could receive, where they could make sacrifice and receive mercy. That was the purpose. And then David wanted to build a temple, and God said, no, your son will build it. So Solomon comes along. Solomon builds this beautiful temple, and now the temple is again a place where you can sacrifice and receive mercy. And in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar came in and took everything out of the tabernacle, everything out of the temple. All the gold, all the bowls, everything. Everything they used to worship. The Ark of the Covenant is gone. Some say that Jeremiah snuck it out of there, but it's gone. It has not been seen since. Now, there's a church in Ethiopia that claims they have it, but nobody can go and look at it. So, if that's the case, then I got one in my basement too, right? But you can't check it. It's a place where you take a sacrifice and you receive mercy. The temple was destroyed. They just spent 70 years living in Babylon with no temple, with no altar. Now they have an altar. Now they're getting a temple. Instead of being excited that, hey, we have a place where we can sacrifice and receive mercy, they're feeling this tension because it's not as good as the one they had. And we think, you fools, how can you be so unappreciative? We never do stuff like that. Haggai says, be strong, be strong, be strong. Keep going. Don't give up. Verse 6. For thus says the Lord of hosts, yet once more, in a little while, I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. I will shake all nations, so that the treasures of all nations shall come in, and I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord of hosts. The silver is mine, the gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts. The latter glory of this house shall be greater than the former, says the Lord of hosts. And in this place I will give peace. The latter glory will be greater than the former. Have you seen this place? We'll see when Moses constructed the tabernacle with the help of the Israelites, and they prayed, and God's glory came down in a pillar of fire. When Solomon dedicated the temple in 2 Kings, the glory of God came down in fire and consumed the gift that was on the altar and filled the Holy of Holies. Next week we're going to read about what happens when this temple is dedicated and there's no fire. But in 500 years, Jesus Christ is going to walk into this building. And God says, it won't just be my glory that fills that building. I myself is going to step into this house. And you better believe the latter glory is going to be better than the former. Now, they don't know that. It's an end times prophecy. But God's making a promise, and he absolutely delivered. God says, I will shake the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the dry land. Anybody ever experienced an earthquake? Really? No? Okay, a couple of you. I see people nodding their heads. We don't do that. Okay. It must be the introverts. Like, I'm not raising my hand. You're dragging me up there. All right, extroverts. Who has not been in an earthquake? Okay, now, who has been in an earthquake? There we go. See, now you have to get the introverts going. Now there is. Okay, I've not been in one, but I watched a bunch of videos online. It didn't look near as scary online as I imagined it felt in person, because online it just looked like somebody was bumping the camera. But they felt earthquakes. And God says, I'll shake the earth, and I'll shake the seas, and I'll shake the heavens. The Bible says that God measures the heavens by the span of his hand, that God can wrap his arms around the universe, and God can shake it. Now, he's not crushing it, but God says, I can shake things up. I can change things. I've done it before. I've been over backwards to do things for you guys before. You think I won't do it again? God says, the gold is like, listen, you know why they're concerned about money? Do you know why God brings up the gold and silver? Because when Cyrus had sent them to build the temple, he sent them with money. But 16 years later, guess what happened to that money? They done spent that money. Okay, put money in your savings account and you're like, oh, we're just going to leave that for a rainy day. And then when it rains, you go, hey, what happened? Oh, yeah, remember that car we wanted to buy? Remember that vacation we took? Yeah. And God says, don't worry about this little town. Don't worry about paying it. The gold of the treasures of the nations are mine. I'll shake it out like a piggy bank and I'll dump money out on you. And I will bring peace. Hasn't mentioned peace at all. Why does he throw peace back up? Oh, that's right, because somebody narked on them to the king that they were building a temple and took all their names down and reported on them. Like, you guys are all worried. My glory is going to be greater here. I will bring peace. I will shake the nations. I have everything I need. Isaiah 43:18. As I was preparing the sermon, this verse kind of came to me, and I thought, man, that would be really cool to mention that verse, except I don't like to jump on a story and kind of cherry pick a verse to try to make my point. But I looked up the verse anyway. In Isaiah 43, Isaiah is prophesying to the exiles who have returned, who will return from Babylon. It's these people. Like, heck yeah, I'm going to use that verse. Let's read it. Isaiah says, when you go back into the land, remember not the former things, nor consider the things of old. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? Do you don't see it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. He says, listen, when you get back, stop looking for what used to be. Don't expect me to do it. I'm doing a new thing. This is a direct prophecy. This could not be more in context. This is exactly what Isaiah was speaking 150 years in advance, 170 years in advance to these people in this time. So let's flip back to Ezra now. Let's see what happens. So the king gets this letter. King Darius gets a letter that says, hey, this guy's Zerubbabel and Joshua, and here's a list of all his buddies. They've started this huge building project, and they're using these giant stones, and the letter's kind of written. You can read the letter, it's in there. It's written in a way that sounds like they say they're building a temple, but it looks like they're building a fortress. So Darius keeps reading, and the letter says, they said that King Cyrus told them to build it. So Darius has the record searched, finds out Cyrus did in fact send them to build it. If you know anything about Persian history, and I'm just going to throw this out there, go read the story of Daniel and the lion's den. I was going to preach it, but I don't want to get too far off the subject. The idea is when one Persian king makes a command, the next king can't override it. So if one leader would make an executive order, when the next leader steps in, he can't just sign a bunch of executive orders overriding the last one. Sounds like something that they were doing a long time ago. So Darius can't override what Cyrus said. So in Ezra chapter 6, beginning in verse 6, this is King Darius' response to the governor who wrote this letter. Therefore Tatnai, governor of the province beyond the river, Shethar-Bozenai, and your associates, the governors who are in the province beyond the river, keep away. Let the work on this house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews rebuild this house of God on its site. Moreover, I make a decree regarding what you shall do for these elders of the Jews who are rebuilding the house of God. The cost is to be paid to these men in full, without delay, from the royal revenue, the tribute of the province from beyond the river, and whatever is needed, bulls, rams, or sheep for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, or oil, as the priests at Jerusalem require. Let that be given to them day by day without fail, that they may offer pleasing sacrifices to the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and his sons. Also, track this in verse 11. I make a decree, if anyone alters this edict, a beam shall be pulled out of his house, and he shall be impaled on it, and his house shall be made a dunghill. Boom! Provision, protection, blessing, permission, all delivered through the hands of a pagan king.
Still in Haggai.
You're worried about these jokers writing your names down? I will shake the heavens and the nations. And now the utmost authority on planet Earth has made a decree that says, not only will you leave them alone and don't bother them, but you're going to give them whatever they need. And it's coming out of your end. I'm not sending you any money. You're going to pay for it. You're going to give them the sacrifices. You're going to give them the oil. You're going to feed them. You're going to buy them lunch. Don't touch them. And if you mess with them, we're going to take a beam out of your roof and impale you on it. We're going to burn your house down. I think the Jews might have got a little cocky at that point. Hey, I'm hungry. Would you fix me a sandwich? Why don't you grab me one of them big stones and roll it over here, Charlie? Suddenly things aren't so bad. Wow. I was all worried that the king was going to take us back to Babylon and not let us build. They just got empowered more than they've ever been empowered. Listen, that doesn't even require faith. They've now got the army of Persia backing them up to finish building this temple. They got all the money they need. You know why? Because God is faithful. Does everything he said he was going to do. Every time. I say this a lot. I'm surprised and I'm surprised. Every time God comes through for me, I'm surprised. I searched my Facebook history yesterday for the last time I put it on Facebook. You know when it was? March 10th, 2020. It was the day I accepted this job. I'm just like, God, I can't believe. After that whole year and the church failing in Birmingham and not even sure if you were going to call me back into this. God, I just feel so overwhelmed. And I'm surprised. We shouldn't be surprised when God does stuff like this. It shouldn't faze us that God moves on a king. Proverbs says the king's heart is a stream in the hand of the Lord. He directs it wherever he wants. We're still worried about who's going to win the election. God's not nervous. We shouldn't get surprised when God delivers. That's exactly what God does. We're waiting for God to do exactly what he did last time. We could miss what God's doing in the moment. I like to watch those HGTV shows where they refinish houses, and by I like to yell at them and tell them everything they're doing wrong. Because nobody does demo with a sledgehammer, but when they're done, it looks like a new house, right? No, it's the same address, it's the same infrastructure, it's the same framing, but there's a new facade, there's a new kitchen, they've taken some walls down, they've opened it up. Same house, new house. That's how God works. God loves to make things new. Ezekiel 36:26, I will give you a new heart, and I will give you a new spirit. God says, sing to me a new song. God says, I will put a new song in your heart. 2 Corinthians 5 says, you are a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things are new. Isaiah says, behold, I am doing a new thing. God doesn't recreate, he renews. God takes what's there and he renews it. God does something different. He's a fan of those things. That's exactly how he works. He says, I will shake the heavens for you. I will shake the unshakable. I will move the unmovable. I will knock down mountains. I will part seas. I will defeat giants with children. But every time I show up, I will do it in a new way. God is not stuck in this box where he has to perform. Ephesians 6 says God can do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine. Think of all the things you could ask for. Think of all the things you could imagine God doing. He could do immeasurably more. It can't even be measured what God can accomplish. And yet we look for God to do the same thing he did Christmas in 1995, and we get dissatisfied. And we get frustrated because the new temple doesn't look like the old temple. And this new situation doesn't look like the old situation. And we stop and we forget that God is faithful. Every time. Listen, the past is often just as much a figment of your imagination as the future. We remember things better than they were. They had just celebrated the Feast of Booths. They had just celebrated God delivering them from the hand of Pharaoh, feeding them through the desert for 40 years, bringing them into this territory, conquering all these lands, and now they're, God, it's not going to work, and his temple. Like, you just got done celebrating this. Like, wait, we're the same way. You will find something to complain about this afternoon. Steelers are 9-0, right? Come to my house and watch me complain about Tomlin. What kind of coach would call that play? One that's running a perfect season. He's never had a bad season. I don't care. I'll call for his head in one play, and I'll be praising the next play. Brilliant idea, coach. And the next play, fire him, bring back Cowher, right? Because under Bill Cowher, everything was wonderful. Bill Cowher had some losing seasons. But I get nostalgic. Is Jerome Bettis still playing in Brooklyn team? We remember the way it used to be. And for those of you who are a little older, you want to see Franco Harris and Terry Bradshaw out there. Terry Bradshaw is old, fat, and bald, and apparently mean, if you've ever watched him. But we remember the way it was, and God says, I'm doing a new thing. I provide provision, I'll provide protection, I'll provide blessing, but stop looking for it the way I used to do it and get your eyes on what I'm doing right now. Listen, Thanksgiving is not just a time to be thankful for what God has done, but to be thankful for what God is doing. And sometimes that thankfulness is, God, help me see what you're doing right now. Because it's really hard to see what God is doing now. I can tell you what God did before, and I can tell you what God should do in the future, because I've got it all figured out. But it's hard to see what God is doing right now. We need to remember that God is faithful. God, you are faithful. You are constant. You have never forsaken us.